Thank you everyone for joining us today. This is the first ever virtual international destination station sponsored by NASA and the ISS US National Lab. We're really excited to have you with us today. Normally we have smaller audiences. Today we're about 500 and we're really happy to have you all with us. We have people here today that are from all over the world, from India, Germany, France, Kenya, Sri Lanka, Indonesia. We welcome you all. We're really happy to have you with us. And before we get started, I'd like to kick this off with a message from Kathy Leaders. She's the Associate Administrator of NASA. Could you please roll our message from Kathy?
Hello, my name is Catherine Leaders, and I'm the Associate Administrator of the Human Exploration Operations Mission Directorate. And I would like to thank you for joining our virtual International Destination Station. Destination Station is a NASA outreach event with the goal of connecting companies and researchers with representatives from NASA and the ISS National Lab to demonstrate how the International Space Station, our incredible microgravity in orbit, can advance their research and technology development. Typically, Destination Station visits a few cities around the country each year. We are living in unique times now, but this also provides opportunities for us to engage with potential researchers in new and interesting ways, to include virtual platforms like this, our inaugural virtual International Destination Station. Over the years, NASA and the National Lab have used this forum to engage with a variety of partners that become part of the space station research community, representing highly recognizable companies as well as academic institutions. We hope this event will provide all researchers and viewers an understanding of the incredible research capabilities available when you take gravity out of the equation on the space station. We will share with you examples of experimentation and let you hear from the perspective of astronaut Christina Koch, who is like to execute these experiments in space. As we look to the future of the space station, we see incredible promise and opportunity. For nearly 20 years, astronauts have been living and working in space continuously, facilitating more than 3,000 different experiments. And the knowledge gained from those years of pushing the limits of science and innovation have informed us on target areas that will bring value to our nation and push an emerging market in low Earth orbit. From research avenues like in-space production, where researchers can use the station to influence a sustainable commercial market in space, to advanced materials and technology development, the space station serves as our orbiting incubator in space. And we hope that your ideas will make you a part of this burgeoning research community. We have a great schedule to make today's event educational and enriching for you. Welcome to International Destination Station.
Thank you very much, Kathy. We appreciate the introduction. And we do have a terrific agenda for today. We have a number of speakers I'll introduce in just a minute, including our astronaut. And we have an opportunity for people in the audience to be asking us questions. After we're finished with the presentation, there will be a breakout session where you can ask more questions about how to put your research on the ISS. So thank you again for joining us. And with that, let me introduce our panelists. First with us today is Jennifer Buckley. Jennifer is the International Space Station Deputy Chief Scientist. Thank you for joining us today, Jennifer. Also with us, Liz Warren. Liz is a Senior Program Manager for the ISS National Lab, works with me here at the ISS National Lab, and she is based in Houston. Christina Koch, NASA astronaut and a record holder for the longest space flight for a woman at 328 days in space. Again, thank you to all my panelists for joining us today. This is going to be a great session. With that, let me turn it over to Jennifer, who's going to start us off with the session. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you for joining us. This year, we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of human presence living aboard the International Space Station. I like to think about this for a teenager today. Every day they have been alive, somebody has been working on the International Space Station. We know that space will play a role in shaping the future. It's been doing so since humans first ventured there. So it's my pleasure today to share just a few of those ways. If I could have the next chart, please. Okay, and the next chart. Space has already influenced our lives. There have been many benefits for people here on Earth that have come from our pursuit of exploring space. You'll recognize some of the byproducts on this chart. Also, I'm sure you guys are familiar with spinoffs that we've had from the space industry. Next chart, please. Opportunity awaits for innovation. Space isn't just about exploration. We're not only looking to go further into the depths of space, but also to use the space environment to benefit our life here on Earth. As Kathy mentioned, over the past 20 years, R&D on the space station has evolved to offer opportunities to non-NASA researchers. So we've had over 3,000 research investigations, served over 4,000 scientists and investigators from 108 different countries. I want to encourage you all, this is your asset to utilize. As a US taxpayer or a member of a partner country, you've already paid for the infrastructure and the flights. This is your space station, and you have the opportunity to take advantage of the ISS to accelerate your R&D objectives. Next chart, please. We're also entering a new era of space. We're living in an era of increased space access. Things we're talking about today may seem far off or costly, but we've been working hard to establish new and affordable points of entry into the low Earth orbit economy. Low Earth orbit is becoming democratized with new turnkey services that are being rolled out every year that lower those barriers to entry. The space environment for research and development is more accessible than ever. Next chart, please. I like to show this chart to show you the size of your orbiting lab. So this is space station superimposed over a US football field. So you can see just how large it is. Next chart. Now I'd like to introduce you to the research team that we have on space station. These are the crew members of Expedition 63. We have Ivan Wagner, Anatoly Ivanishin, and Chris Cassidy. Next chart. And here we have Chris preparing some molecular biology samples. So our highly skilled space station crew is really dedicated to the success of research as well as your flight project. Next chart, please. And I'm happy to say that Expedition 63 was joined just this morning by 3 new crew members. We have Kate Rubins, Sergei Rizkov, and Sergei Kudzverkov. It is also Kate's birthday, so happy birthday to Kate, and we are excited to have all 6 on board and looking forward to the science they're going to do on space station. Next chart. So this is an example of one of our commercial cargo resupply providers. We have regular flights to the International Space Station that not only provide upmass and carry volume and science to the space station, but they also have the infrastructure to support the research that's going up to ISS. So they provide things like power, thermal management, cold stowage, and even have small satellite deploy capability. Next chart. So in keeping with our adventurous spirit, NASA is committed to landing again on the moon and continuing on to Mars. The ISS is a valuable asset towards those goals. The technology we're going to need to venture farther, we're proving out on space station today. Next chart. So I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about why space. The 2 big key points here really are location and access to microgravity. Next chart. Microgravity alters many of the observable phenomenon, both within the physical and the life sciences. So by eliminating the effects of gravity for an extended period of time, this allows research to occur that would be impossible in a terrestrial or near terrestrial environment. So a couple examples of research that we do on space station include flame propagation. The fundamentals of fire and flame can be understood better once we remove gravity from the equation. Protein crystal growth, biological cells. So we see that cells and tissues form 3D structure better in microgravity. So this is a really interesting area of research right now on space station. We're also getting into looking at things like manufacturing. So for example, fiber optic cables, they can be fabricated in a much higher quality due to the reduced defects of microgravity. So this allows for a product that is able to provide better data transfer rate, carry over longer distances. And my colleague Liz Warren is going to talk a little bit more about some more specific examples on the types of science that we do on ISS. Next chart, please. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the resources that space station and microgravity offer. One of the big ones, obviously, is the unique vantage point. ISS is approximately 250 miles above Earth. From the ISS platform, you have the ability to look out, so looking at things like astrophysics research, and also to look down at Earth science and remote sensing. The ISS covers an orbital path of 90% of the Earth's population. Next chart, please. In space, we also experience extreme environmental conditions. The space station provides a platform for these extreme conditions. External to the space station, you can have exposure to extreme temperatures, to vacuum, to atomic oxygen, even high energy radiation. We get high-speed micrometeor debris hits, so this is a great place to test things like shielding. Testing and qualification of materials, sensors, and subcomponents exposed to these extreme conditions provide data to enable manufacturing of long life and reliable components, both here for use on Earth as well as in spacecraft. Next chart. We learn new things every day that help us understand how to better live and work in space. We need to keep learning to reach the goals of the Artemis program and ultimately to put the first humans on Mars. We hope you'll want to be part of this mission with us. To further humankind through benefits here on Earth, as well as exploring the cosmos. Now I'd like to hand over to Liz Warren to discuss how space can transform your research.
Hey, Liz, this is Christine. We're not hearing you. How about
now? Can you hear me now? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sorry about that, everyone. Thank you, Jennifer. You've already gone to the next slide. So in 2005, the United States Congress designated the US portion of the space station as a national laboratory. So what is a national laboratory? Usually very large or very unique research facilities that are open to many users to solve big problems. The organization I work for, the Center for the Advancement of Science and Space, manages the ISS US National Laboratory. And we're not just opening the doors to space, we're scouring the nation through events like this to let you know that you have access to the space station. So we focus on a number of key research areas in our formal research solicitations, but maybe you see something that we don't. So we're open to unsolicited proposals outside of that pathway. No matter how you get to us, whether it's via NASA or via the ISS National Lab, we have the infrastructure to analyze and respond to your proposal. Whether you're an engineer, a scientist, corporation, at an academic institution, or at another government agency, we will help you find your way if you have a good idea. Next slide. So why do we do all of this? The ultimate goal of ISS National Lab activities are to bring value back to the US economy and to the US taxpayers by benefiting life here on Earth. And the ISS National Lab fosters a diverse range of research in life sciences, physical sciences, remote sensing, technology development, and education to achieve that goal. So let's talk about the ISS National Lab portfolio. Next slide. So as Jennifer described, microgravity has profound effects on physical systems. Surface tension and capillarity dominate fluid behavior. Buoyancy-driven convection doesn't exist. So hot air doesn't rise and cold air doesn't fall. Microgravity also has profound effects on living systems, from microbes to cells, to plants, to animals and humans. There are changes brought about by exposure to microgravity. And again, to reiterate, the space station also provides an ideal platform to observe the Earth or test sensors to observe the Earth. as well as other technologies in an austere environment. I like to tell other researchers that conducting science in microgravity, it's like looking at your research topic with a brand new lens of discovery. Next slide. So the space station is a world-class multidisciplinary laboratory. There are glove boxes, minus 80-degree freezers, refrigerators, incubators, microscopes, plant greenhouses, rodent habitats, and we even have a DNA sequencer. Next slide. There are furnaces, centrifuges, a 3D printer, and facilities for conducting combustion research, fluid research, and even quantum physics. There are also facilities outside of the space station, as I mentioned, for studying the Earth and the cosmos, but also for materials testing in that extreme environment, or for CubeSat deployment. Next slide. So now I'll touch on a few examples from the ISS National Lab portfolio. The team from Adidas wondered if they could improve the performance of their Boost shoe midsole. Now, in production on Earth, particles of foam are fused together into the midsole, but the ordering of those particles is subject to gravitational settling. They were looking to see if microgravity could result in a better distribution of those foam particles that would result in a better midsole performance. If so, this is something that they can work to reproduce in manufacturing back on Earth. This is actually their third project with us as they explore new ways to innovate for their products. Next slide. A number of organizations and academic institutions are leveraging microgravity to address human health issues here on Earth, like osteoporosis, muscle wasting, cancer, and neurodegenerative diseases. For example, this project from the Michael J. Fox Foundation toward development of a drug to inhibit a protein associated with the development of Parkinson's disease. Now, there are a couple 100,000 different proteins in the human body. And if you understand their structure at the atomic level, you can design a drug to mimic, enhance, or inhibit that protein's function. The trick is, it's difficult to grow some of those protein crystals in a lab well enough here on Earth to really understand everything that's going on at the subatomic level. The crystals can get distorted in a lab on Earth as they settle to the bottom of a container, so due to gravity. Protein crystal growth in microgravity allows for slower crystal formation without distortion, and the crystals can grow larger, more uniformly, and more perfectly. What I want to highlight here is how integral the crew, the astronaut, was for this investigation. Here you see European Space Agency astronaut Alex Gerst pipetting different concentrations of precipitate and solution into a well plate. And a few days later, after the crystals were growing, he used a microscope to see which concentrations were producing the right amount of crystals. All of this work was actually remote guided from the ground, but the crew on board is really like the eyes and hands of researchers. Next slide. So you're all familiar with 3D printing, right? Some of you might even have a 3D printer at home. This is a different kind of 3D printer. The biofabrication facility is a 3D bioprinter that explores the possibility of printing human tissues and maybe someday human organs in microgravity. Now, we have 3D bioprinters here on Earth, but we're limited to printing about a centimeter thickness of tissue. Any thicker and the weight of the tissue collapses on new blood vessels. You can try to add some additional scaffolding and structure to prints on Earth, but then you have to go in and remove those later on. Now in microgravity, you don't need a scaffold, and you can use a very low viscosity bioink, which the cells prefer. So in microgravity, there's time for blood vessels, new blood vessels to grow, and for the tissues to mature. Now, there are over 100,000 people in the US waiting for an organ transplant. Imagine one day being able to bring that number down. Now, we're a very long way from custom printing tissues in space and implanting them in patients on the ground. We may never really get there, but perhaps we're not too far away from providing organs grown in space for drug testing and development here on Earth. Next slide. My last example, Jennifer mentioned earlier, there are 3 companies currently optimizing commercial in-orbit production of Zeblan glass fiber. That's a fluoride-based optical fiber used for communication transmission. In-orbit production of Zeblan fibers allow for far fewer imperfections, much more efficient transmission of information. And this has the potential to revolutionize fiber optic communications and high-powered lasers. Now, the manufacture of specialty optical fibers in space represents a high return on the cost of the payload mass to and return product from space. Next slide. So I know what you're thinking. You don't need to be an expert in space engineering to do any of this. You will be partnered with a partner that works by your side to translate what you do in your laboratory into something that works in the spaceflight environment. And that is no small feat. Microgravity is kind of famous for throwing difficult challenges at researchers. Next slide. So this is actually a fully contained automated research investigation that fits in a box 4 inches by 8 inches. Now, this happens to be a high school student's project through our STEM program done in conjunction with Marvel Comics. You might even be able to see Marvel and Groot, or Rocket and Groot on the mission patch there, sticker. So there are many ways for students to get involved with the space station. There's ham radio, there's talking to astronauts, there's educational downlinks, and students can even launch their own experiment to space. Next slide. So that brings us back to the big picture of why we are doing all of this. Science in space to benefit life on Earth. Next slide. Finally, if we have piqued your interest, please engage with us on social media. Get in touch with us via the email you see on the slide. Sean would love to hear from you. And even if you haven't fully thought through your idea yet, even if you just have a thought that might be something you want to do, get in touch with us. Our purpose is to work with you to develop that idea and try and make it work. Next up, it is my honor to hand it over to NASA astronaut Christina Koch. First, though, we have a short video highlighting some of the microgravity research activities performed by Christina during her recent spaceflight to the space station. Enjoy.
Looks like we're going to be adding 150 mLs of water to every pillow. Again, checking the wicks. We're about 2 minutes or less out from about a 5-minute LOS. So if we do go LOS, just continue on. Copy.
I'll step through on my own for the setup and let you know when questions come up. And yes, we definitely are all doing this as a we and as a team. So you all will be installing the test cartridge as well. Okay, thank you. Yep, fun being lab partners, and you guys have a happy holiday.
Delta have its cap back on?
Negative, thank you. Good eye.
Hey, Christina, if you don't mind, would you mind giving us a zoom in on the screen? We're just excited and curious to see this happen.
Absolutely.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much to Liz, Jennifer, and Christine for the great introduction and the introduction to the awesome science that's going on board the International Space Station. That video is just such a great reminder to me how much fun it is to do science on board in microgravity, and especially how much I loved working with researchers on the Earth and how I really felt like I was their lab partner in space. So I hope that over the next 20 minutes, I can give you guys an idea of what it's like to actually do science in space, what it's like to work with an astronaut from the ground, to have someone else be your eyes, ears, and hands conducting the science that's so important to you all, and just a little bit about my mission and how science fit into it. So long before I found myself here in astronaut candidate training, I was working in places like this. My background is as a scientist, actually, but physical scientist and engineer. So I studied electrical engineering and physics. And my career spanned sort of a mix of designing space science instruments, so the science gadgets that rode on NASA missions to other planets or Earth orbiting satellites, and then also working as a field engineer in really remote science bases all over Earth in extreme environments. So I was always really drawn to the idea of science on the frontiers. And that is what brought me into the career of becoming an astronaut. So after joining NASA as an astronaut, we go through a lot of different training. Some of it is to do science, but a lot of it is just to do all the other operations we do on board the space station. We get to learn how to fly high performance jets and basically become pilots. We get to learn about science, and in my case, as a physical scientist, used to joke that I didn't touch things that were wet or alive. Well, all that had to change because, as you've learned, the International Space Station conducts science in all different disciplines, including biology. So luckily, they trained me on the ground to learn how to run biological experiments. I got to learn how to do spacewalking, which we do in a gigantic pool called the Neutral Buoyancy Lab that actually has a full-size mock-up of the space station in the pool. The pool's 40 feet deep by 200 by 100 feet wide, and it is awesome training on how to do spacewalks. Now, after a few years of that astronaut candidate training, I finally got my flight assignment to the International Space Station, and that meant that I could start more specialized training. So that included training on the specific science experiments that I was going to get to run while I was in space. Now, one thing that's really neat about being an astronaut is sometimes the experiments that we're involved in are actually on us. So we're studying how the human body reacts to space. And that's to both further our missions into space and learn more about how we can accommodate astronauts on long duration missions, but it's also to learn about the fundamentals of how the human body works. There's certain things that we can actually make happen in microgravity that we can't do on Earth to study phenomenon about the human body. So this is me participating in an experiment before I ever even left the ground. Of course, a big part of my training was also learning how to fly as a co-pilot in the Soyuz rocket. We do partner with a lot of different countries on board the International Space Station, and one way we partner is that we actually ride, one of the ways we get there is to ride a Russian Soyuz rocket. So I had the honor of training in Russia on how to do that. and before long, I found myself here. The space capsule that you just saw me inside of actually is right underneath these fairings on this rocket. And about 8 minutes after this moment, when the giant rocket is lit, the spacecraft comes out of the fairing and you find yourself in microgravity, orbiting Earth, going about 17,500 miles per hour. But you're also floating, so it doesn't feel like you're going that fast. Now, this is what we look like when we're in open space on our way to the space station. And this circular docking mechanism actually automatically docks with the space station, and that's the very hatch that we open when we enter into the space station, our new home with our other friends, in my case, for a stay that lasted about 11 months. Now, you get put to work right away, and we do all different kinds of work on board the space station. A lot of that is to support this cutting edge laboratory that we have so that we can do the science. For example, in this picture, I'm doing some upgrades and some maintenance. We also have to get new experiments to the space station along with all of our supplies, and we do that with cargo spaceships that actually come and sort of parallel park right next to the space station, and astronauts drive the robotic arm to reach out and grapple these vehicles, and then they're actually docked to station. This is me and my crewmate Drew Morgan driving the robotic arm from what I call the bay window of space station, a module called the cupola. Another type of cargo vehicle is seen here. This is a SpaceX cargo vehicle, and the last one you saw was a Cygnus Northrop Grumman cargo vehicle. And this is what it looks like when it's docked to space station. And as you can see, it's a gorgeous view over the Earth. Now, of course, part of our job is the fun and exciting work of spacewalking. This is Jessica and I preparing our spacesuits before one of our spacewalks. And this is what it looks like a day in the life of a spacewalker on the outside of the space station, doing a repair or an upgrade to keep the space station running at peak performance. This is me and my crewmate, Nick Hague. Another really exciting part of our work is the international cooperation aspect. This is me working with my cosmonaut colleague, Alexei Ovchinin, to prepare one of the Russian spacewalking spacesuits for their spacewalk. During my time on board the space station, I was honored to fly with the very first astronaut from the United Arab Emirates, Haza Al-Mansouri, and this is me filming him during the first ever Arabic language tour of the International Space Station. Now, getting to the meat and potatoes of what we're talking about today, which is science. And as we talked about, there's all different kinds of science in this national laboratory, this orbiting laboratory that we have. A lot of people ask me sometimes, well, what kind of science do you do on board the space station? Because we're used to a national lab specializing, like being a biology lab or a technology lab of some kind. But we do it all because we will do any science that benefits from the microgravity or space environment. And it turns out that is basically covering almost every realm of science you can imagine. This is Jessica and I working with an experiment called Veggie, where we were growing plants. One of my favorites, not only because the amazing smell of the plants reminded me of home, and we got to eat the salad when we were done, but this research is so important, one, for understanding plant physiology, and also for understanding systems that we may need in the future for going deeper into space. This is me carrying out a genes in space experiment where we got to use one of the exciting new technologies that's out there called CRISPR to learn more about how DNA can repair itself in the microgravity environment. Earlier during another talk, you saw a picture of Chris Cassidy, who's currently on board the space station, and he was doing the same kind of experiment. Now, I noticed that Chris used little straps to keep the pipettes from floating around. I was more of a stand them up on their end using Velcro kind of a person. But as you can see, our experimental setup gets to be pretty unique when everything would float away if we didn't keep it down on the table some other way. As Liz talked about, one of the really awesome things that the microgravity environment gives us is the ability to crystallize proteins to study potential disease fighting like pharmaceuticals and medicines and countermeasures. And the reason is that these protein crystals can often form better in microgravity than on Earth. And this was an experiment that meant just that. One of the coolest things I ever heard in space was when a researcher I was working with would say, I'm not sure. Because what that meant was we were discovering something new. And this was one of those moments where we were seeing crystals that had never been formed before, that had never been seen before. And we were actually discovering together, hand in hand, what these crystals would look like, the conditions that best grew them, and it was exciting knowing that that research was going to be used back on Earth to fight diseases like cancer. Another neat tech demonstration that also involved biology and human research is this one, which is called tissue on a chip technology. This is technology where we actually use something as small as, say, a credit card, and we build in all the microfluidics, all the kind of hardware that would be in the structure around our tissue or cells, and we see how it responds to the microgravity environment or to whatever inputs we're giving it in the experiment. Now, this is an advancement because in the past, we may just be able to study cells in, say, a petri dish, which doesn't actually mimic the environment that those cells operate in, which is so important when you're talking about studying what happens when you remove that gravity vector. So this was a really neat experiment that helped to study actually kidney diseases in this particular case. This is me working on that biofabrication facility 3D bioprinter that Liz also mentioned. Really awesome experience watching those inks come out of the print head and seeing structures form that I knew weren't able to be made on Earth, and then being involved in preserving those structures and seeing them go back to Earth so that the scientists that I was working with could get to study them and further improve the equipment. Fluid action in space, the coolest thing ever. So in a gravity environment like 1G that we have here on Earth, gravity kind of rules or is the predominant force in all fluid motion. But when you get to space and you remove that, all you have is the surface tension of that fluid, and it is awesome to see what happens in that environment. We get to study the fundamentals of fluid properties. This helps us not only sort of hone in on all kinds of different industrial processes to give us that edge in industry, but also to understand how we can design space systems like life support systems, refueling systems, to keep pushing deeper into space exploration and understanding how we can basically overcome some of the challenges of working with fluids in the microgravity environment. Tech demonstrations. This is me working with an experiment called Spheres, which is an autonomous robot mission where students got to compete writing the code to make these floating robots do different tasks. And it was a really neat time during my mission because we were actually bringing on a next generation version of these autonomous robots. In the case of Spheres, they basically found out where they were with sonar, and with the new generation of this robot called Astrobee, they actually used cameras and video processing to map out where these robots are so that they can eventually be used to help astronauts do tasks around space station. On to physics. Of course, something I love so much with my background. This is when I got the best Christmas present ever on board the space station, a new science module to the Cold Atoms Lab experiment. Cold Atom Labs is an experiment that uses basically a laser system to create the coldest thing in the universe. We are talking billionth of a degree above absolute zero. And with this, we can actually create specific states of matter that can't be created otherwise to study fundamental properties of the world around us, uniting the quantum theory with gravitational theory. Really huge, potentially earth-shattering science going on board the space station because we can create these super cooled specks of matter. And of course, no picture would be complete without showing that I also got to install the module while hanging off of the ceiling. As we mentioned, we have glove boxes. So as you can imagine, a lot of fluidics and other little equipment likes to try and get away and float around in the space station. So we have glove boxes where we often will set up experiments, even if they are run by researchers on the ground. We'll do the complete setup and monitoring and any upgrades and tweaking of the experiment so that the researchers can basically just take control of it after it's set up. This particular experiment looked at the disease of Alzheimer's and how some of the physical building of the plaques can happen and how that protein process happens. Combustion, fire in space, so cool. This is called the CERAC. It's a long-standing experimental facility on board the space station where we can actually study flames in space. Now, you are used to what a candle looks like on the Earth, the shape of the flame. In space, a flame actually looks more like a perfect sphere. And so we can study how all those processes happen, the oxidation, the use of fuel, and how fire propagates, how it burns, how clean it burns, so that we can have better fuel efficiency, so that we can have better fire mitigation techniques. And we get to basically work with researchers to set up the different equipment needed in these facilities. Now, we're not just limited to science inside the space station. The ISS can be a platform where we can actually do remote sensing of both space-facing things and the Earth. This is a photo of Jessica and I operating the robotic arm during a spacewalk where we actually upgraded a world-class telescope that's mounted to the outside of the space station, studying dark matter and dark energy. So really probing these fundamental aspects of our universe and doing it from a platform where we actually can upgrade facilities, not just a satellite that goes out and can't be revisited, but things where we can utilize astronauts and the ingenious efforts of engineers on the ground to continually improve these science bases. This is a really neat thing that students can be involved in called basically nanosatellites. So instead of having to go find your own rocket to launch your nanosatellite, there's a program where you can have it sent to the space station on one of the cargo vehicles. We will load it up in a satellite launcher, put it in an airlock, and that satellite launcher will then actually put those satellites into orbit, and they can be doing a variety of things. So we basically make the kind of space environment, the orbital space environment of near low Earth orbit, accessible to nanosatellites developed by all different types of small businesses, school groups, and things like that. And finally, the final kind of external experiment that I'm going to talk about is all about materials. So basically, anyone who's interested in the physics of what happens to a material when it is exposed to this very unique environment of the outside of space station, the radiation, the atomic oxygen, the UV radiation, the vacuum of space, all that can be studied here. So we do everything from industries that might be interested to researchers, and this benefits both, like I mentioned, industry, but also NASA's efforts to explore deeper and to make sure that we're using the best and optimal materials in all of our designs, materials that are going to withstand long duration missions and basically have the performance that we expect throughout the life of the mission. But after all that, I have to tell you that it is not just work that we do on board the space station, but yes, we have weekends in space, and weekends were my favorite time to look down on the Earth and do my hobby, which is photography. I love taking pictures like this one that I took. I'll give you guys a second to think about what we're looking at before I tell you, but I love taking pictures of Earth, not only places I was from or visited, but places where my friends lived. And this is actually the California coast. And you can see the big valley here and all of it's fertile, as well as all the great surf spots along the coast. I also love taking pictures of the night side of the Earth from space. So with all my work in Antarctica and other polar regions, I used to see the northern lights and the southern lights all the time from Earth. So to see them from above, looking down on Earth on a planetary scale, was just absolutely amazing. I'm going to go back and show you. This is what a docked Soyuz vehicle looks like when it's docked to the space station. So this is the one that I actually rode up on. Another favorite, house favorite that astronauts do on our free time is group dinners with each other, and especially pizza night. Now, normally all of our food is freeze-dried or comes out of packets, but every once in a while for a special occasion, we will make something fun like pizza. And luckily, we are able to kind of wrap up the pizza in tinfoil and utilize our food warmer or the space oven to warm up the pizza and be able to celebrate together. Sadly, all good things must come to an end, and at the end of my 11 months, I came home in the Soyuz capsule after undocking from space station, going through the re-entry process, which is where you actually use the vehicle itself in kind of a fireball. It slows down, going from 17,500 miles per hour to slow enough to open up a parachute. And that's done when the spacecraft actually interacts with the atmosphere itself and produces a bunch of friction. And so by the time you land, your vehicle looks like it's gone through a fireball, essentially, because it has. We land in Kazakhstan if you ride on the Soyuz, and the Russian search and rescue forces immediately meet you and pull you out of the vehicle. This is a great moment when you're back on the planet that you've been, conducting this science to bring benefits back to be home and to be back in the environment, giving back to, the world that sent you to space and that you've been working towards your entire mission is a wonderful moment. With that, I'd like to say thank you so much for your attention and interest, and I really look forward to answering your questions later.
Thank you so much, Christina. Questions are already pouring in here for us, so we're going to have a busy panel discussion, and we have a little bit of time to do that. So if you have a question and you haven't submitted it already, please do submit it. Christina another Christina is collecting the questions and sending them over to us. So just submit those through Q&A. If you would give us your first name, maybe where you're from, that would be great, because we'd like to answer your questions specifically. We also have a few pre-recorded questions that we're going to weave into our conversation here. They're from the Boys and Girls Club, and we'll add those to our conversations as well. A couple of comments from the audience. They just want to thank the panel. They've been enjoying your presentation, and they really appreciate the inspiring content that you've shared with them. So let me start off with, I'm excited about questions. Let me start off with a question that each of you can answer. It's hard to pick just one of the exciting experiments that you've all gotten to be part of the work on in your different roles. But I'm going to ask you the hard question. Can you give us one that was exciting to you, that you think has a lot of promise? Why don't we start with Christina, and then we'll go around to Liz and Jennifer.
Ooh, that is a great question, but it's a tough one. Over 3,000 experiments have been done on space station since it started. I myself did a couple hundred, but I think some of the ones I mentioned really come to mind. I'll have to just narrow it down to two. I loved working on microgravity crystals. Like I said, that moment of discovery in parallel with the researchers that I was working with, seeing crystals for the first time was just absolutely mind-blowing, something so unique and such an honor to be a part of. And then the physics geek in me just has so much love for cold atom labs. When I first found out that that experiment existed, where we were creating the actual states of matter that I had theoretically solved the equations for back in college, I was so happy. I thought maybe all those integrals would finally be worth it. And sure enough, I was lucky enough to be on board when we upgraded the experiment. So it was great to work with the folks from JPL on that one too.
Liz, how about you?
Yeah, I'll go next. I think it is really hard to pick a favorite, but something, and it actually kind of depends on the day that you ask me, but today, right now, I'm very interested in tissue engineering and regenerative medicine. So examples of like the biofabrication, the 3D printer that we saw, the tissue chip that Christina mentioned. This is essentially using microgravity to understand how tissues or organs can repair, regrow, or even replace part of themselves. A lot of this work is being funded by the NSF and the NIH. It's pretty fundamental, but there's a lot of application here, back here on Earth. And one example just to think about, right now I'm in Houston, Texas, and there are a bajillion little lizards out in my backyard. And if a bird or a predator tries to grab one of those lizards and it happens to catch the tail will drop off and the lizard will run away. But the lizard will be able to regrow that tail. Human beings can't do that. Why not? So it's kind of addressing some of the fundamental aspects of self-healing and how we can do that better, and maybe using microgravity to understand how we can do that better for ourselves here on Earth.
Jennifer, what do you think?
So the types of experiments I really like to see are the ones where we can see a transition from the fundamental to the applied. So one that comes to mind is a lot of the early work that was done in fluid physics, like capillary structures and experiments like that, where we learn about capillary flow, have now transitioned into some applied experiments we've had recently on space station. So one has been with Alessandro Grattoni here in Houston. That was actually a nanofluidic drug delivery device that we tested on space station. And that has been very successful, and we've seen some great results, and are hoping to see that move into treating patients. And then that's also fed another experiment we recently flew just this past spring from a company out of Boston called One Drop Diagnostics. And what they're looking at is these small deployable devices that basically look for biomarkers from different diseases. But some of the things we need in space are the same that you would want to, deploy either to a remote location here on Earth, or even something, just at your doctor's office versus going in for a different lab. So you want things that are, small, robust, and independent of orientation. And so I've really enjoyed seeing the way that these different fields feed into each other.
Thanks for that. And again, I know it's tough to pick just one thing to highlight because there's so many interesting things going on. Another question that we have here is that it must be very difficult, Christina, to get used to working in microgravity. And Margaret at NASA Glenn has a specific question around that idea of getting used to things and being so agile and adept. She notes that you worked your first week on the CIR rack and that you were excellent at it, and that having that dexterity and those capabilities must be difficult. So tell us a little bit about what it's tough to get used to and how you managed to become so adept and capable.
Wow. Well, thank you. That's such a appreciated compliment about the CIRAC. That was a really awesome experiment to be a part of. But I can't take all the credit. I specifically remember my first time working on it, and I remember that someone from the ground noticed that I skipped a step, saw it, and called my attention to it, and I was able to fix it real time. So it is an absolute partnership, and I was so amazed that their eagle eyes caught that, not being able to actually be there in person. So thank you. Gosh, challenges. Losing things. Oh my goodness. I, can't keep track of my keys here on Earth. Well, imagine if one, you can't put things down, and two, if they do slip out of your hand, they could go in any direction. It is not fun. Things don't like to stay put in space, so that's a big one. But in all seriousness, more to the point, I think communicating what you're seeing, being that true eyes, ears, hands for your researchers, and being that true partner, being able to communicate things that it's just impossible to really fathom in a 1G environment. And so, seeing things unexpectedly and being able to describe that, and then being the right kind of partner to sort of diagnose what might be going on for an experiment that you may not have even been trained on specifically. And so, having enough of an engineering and science background to sort of speak that language and describe things. And, explaining to researchers who have put a lot of time in designing something for microgravity, one thing I would often say to people is, imagine doing this experiment on the ceiling, and it still has to work how it's designed. And that would happen all the time. I can think of examples where we would have a spool that needed to spool a fiber optic or something. And in the 1G environment, the gravity helped the fiber, stay on the spool. Well, in the 0G environment, it might just pop right off. So there's all kinds of neat things that come up, and working together to work through those is really exciting because, of course, the goal is to have that product at the end of the day, to have those benefits, and to make sure that we get there as fast as possible. So that was the fun part, but it's also the challenging part.
Well, I'm going to queue up one of the questions from our children who have called in advance from the Boys and Girls Club. So Justin, who's on, can you give us the first question from the Boys and Girls Club?
Hi, my name is Rakeberg and I'm from Westwood Elementary. How do you guys eat in space?
So Christina, how do you eat in space?
Wow, great question. Thanks for that. Well, I showed a little sneak peek of our favorite meal of pizza night, but that is definitely not the norm. So I've got a good video that shows the whole process, how we open up a packet of food, how we use the space sink to prepare the food, and then even eating floating food out of a packet. So we'll wait and get that queued up, and I'll describe the process as it goes. So here I am showing a mac and cheese dehydrated package. And as it comes out, you can tell it's really, really dry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick a little inlet to the package onto our space sink. This is actually what a sink looks like in space. Put it on there, dial up exactly how much water I need to put in there to rehydrate it perfectly. That's kind of like, you know, the sink's handle. And then press the button to go ahead and dispense that water. And you can see that it's filling up with water right now, and it's starting to rehydrate our mac and cheese, because what's better than mac and cheese? You gotta have mac and cheese even in space. So there it is, the water's in there, but we need to wait a little while for that to rehydrate. So we utilize our space oven, and that's me, since you can't use gravity to put all the water down in the bottom of it, we actually have to swing our little food packets like you just saw to make sure all the water goes into the area with the food. Pop that into our space oven or food warmer, and then wait a while, set a little clock, come back about 10 minutes later, and get out your mac and cheese. Double checking that it's done. By now you're pretty hungry. And this is our cabinet. We just Velcro all of our stuff, like our scissors, our forks and spoons, and actually pretty much only spoons, to the wall. And so this is me. This is opening up the food packet. Literally ate pretty much every single meal, 3 meals a day, just like what you're seeing here. Got to throw things away in the space trash. Grab your spoon and see how your cooking turned out. Luckily, I didn't take any recipes. I'm not sure that my cooking skills got any better while I was in space, since all I had to do was ever add water. But here is my mac and cheese, one of my favorite meals. And luckily, you can't even really drop it on the floor. It won't go anywhere, even if you don't eat it right away.
I'm just glad you have pizza. I don't know that I could be in space for 11 months without pizza. So I'm glad you have that. We do have another question from the Boys and Girls Club, so I'm gonna have Justin choose that next one up, if you would. Justin, what's the next question from the kids?
Hi, I'm Jeremiah. I'm from Westwood Elementary. How do you guys shower in space?
Ooh, that's another great question. You very adeptly realized that we couldn't just have running water and shower underneath it with a drain in the bottom of the tub, because there's no gravity to bring that water down. It would go absolutely everywhere, and it would be a big mess. So we actually just basically used a modified sponge bath technique. So for showering in space, we have a packet. And instead of having like food, like the mac and cheese that you saw, it actually has a towel folded up in that packet. We stick the packet in the same little space sink that you saw us put it on for the mac and cheese, fill it with water, and that keeps the water contained in the towel. And then we use that towel to wash ourselves off. So it's a pretty simple process, and I never felt like I needed a shower, but I will say that when I finally did get back to Earth, that first shower felt pretty good.
I imagine it's like camping when you come back and you're really happy to be back from the camping expedition.
That's exactly
Liz,
right.
Liz has a special guest in her desk. She was visiting us today. Let's talk a little bit about, there's students who are with us and they have lots of student questions. So Liz Warren, one of the questions was about working on students' experiments in space and how they can access those. Can you tell us a little bit about how we do outreach? And you talked a little bit about the Cube Lab. Can you tell us a little more? Oh,
Yeah.
let me. This is from Liam. I meant to say whose question this was. This is Liam's question. So if you can tell us a little bit more. And do they ever get to talk to Christina if they're students doing experiments?
Hi, Liam. Thank you for your question. So first of all, my message to all the students listening today is to stay curious. I think that is a really important thing. The fact that you're asking questions now is a really good sign. So stay curious. You know, over the years, NASA and the ISS National Lab have recognized that you're the next generation of explorers. And so we do everything we can to keep keep you involved and to let you know that staying in STEM, that's science, technology, engineering, and math, is really important, and it opens up so many career doors for you and helps you stay a critical thinker. And so we have student experiments flying to the space station from as young as middle school students and all the way up through undergraduate and graduate students. So one of our main focuses is to leverage this one-of-a-kind laboratory in space to engage and inspire people just like you, that next generation of explorers. And what better way to do that than to get you involved in doing hypothesis-driven or query-based learning. And yep, it's possible that as a student, you can develop your own experiment, have your own question, and have an astronaut like Christina actually perform that experiment. One of the pictures that she showed in her presentation was an actual student experiment. And but there are other ways too. Astronauts are always participating in events where they're answering questions from space, or even ham radio. You could become a ham radio operator and learn how to use a handheld radio. If you're curious about a place on Earth, maybe there's a lake down near that you live near and you want to see what it looks like from space, or if you have a question about what happens when they cut down all the trees, or what happens in different seasons, you can use an experiment called EarthCam, which is actually the full name of it is the Sally Ride EarthCam. And you can actually have a robotic system use a camera in space to take a picture of something on Earth. So STEM is extremely important. At NASA and the ISS National Lab, we want you to stay involved, and there's a number of ways. I'm going to give you one website to look up. It's called STEM on Station, and that'll connect you with a whole bunch of activities. Maybe you're at school, or maybe you're staying at home right now. There's a lot of fun activities for you that are going to help you learn about living in space, going to the moon, what we need to do to get to Mars. So we want you to stay engaged. We want you to stay curious, and thank you for your interest.
Thank you for that one, Liz. I think there's some really great opportunities for kids to stay close. And I know that the astronauts also do sometimes film things like the Slime in Space experiment, and we get to see those. Yeah, that was super fun. The next question I have is a couple of parts here. So I'm going to start with Christina and then move over to Jennifer. But Christina, COVID has been tough on a lot of people, and they've had to be in close quarters with their family, maybe in lockdown and, not in school and instead doing Zoom. But maybe you had some takeaway from that. And then Jennifer, Olga wants to know if there's been some some research on the mental health of astronauts and the impact of space. So we'll start with Christina, and you can talk about having been stuck in a tuna can flying around the Earth for 11 months. Any thoughts that you have for those of us who are stuck inside with COVID?
Definitely. Thanks for that question, and so insightful to see the parallels there. Oftentimes, I do feel like it is very parallel to what I experienced on board the space station. Some of my friends would tell me, a couple months into the pandemic, gosh, every day feels like a Tuesday. And I thought, yeah, I can relate. So there are some parallels as we're all getting through this together. So one of those that I like to talk about is carving out your space. On board the space station, we have our own room. Each of us has a bedroom, if you will. We call it our crew quarters, but it's only about the size of a phone booth. And it turns out that's enough. Just having a little bit of space to call your own and to have a little reprieve, to recharge your batteries if you need it, is really enough. And you can create that in your own space in a number of ways. Maybe it is a physical space. Maybe it's being outside. Maybe you tell the people around you, hey, when I've got my headphones on, I'm in my space, don't bug me. So however you need to create that space, for me, that was very important. Another thing is find something you love to do in the space that you're in. hey, on the space station, growing those plants was awesome because it was a project. It was something that made, you know, the little environment that I was in feel new and different, new sensory experiences, and just gave me something to focus on, an outlet. But I would say the number one thing is all about reframing. I, you know, learned this technique during my time in the Antarctic. I applied it again at the space station. Reframe. Every time I would hear myself thinking something like, oh, I sure do wish I could just go out and hug my friend. I sure do wish I could just go to a restaurant. Sure do wish I could do this. I would immediately turn it around and say, you know what though? I have these things that I'll never be able to do again that I'm going to really miss one day. And so if you can reframe your present experience like that, you'll never be waiting for it to be over. You'll never be counting down the days. You'll be enjoying every moment, and that allows you to sort of bring your best to every moment too.
Thanks for that, Christina. I think we are all challenged right now, and I think carving out your space and things is definitely helpful. But mental health up there, Jennifer, probably is a challenge. I mean, it's a long time and you're far away from home. So what kind of things does NASA do to help with the mental health aspects?
Yeah, so there are a couple different things. You know, I think part of the question was asking about, you know, research. Do we check in on astronauts and monitor their mental health and their behavior? And, you know, absolutely. You know, we're concerned about their health overall, and mental health is a big part of that. It's just one component of your health and well-being. You know, we do have some folks like Christina who came in with a lot of experience when they were selected as astronauts and are used to working in remote locations and have a lot of you know, tools themselves that they use. You know, we make sure that people have access to talk to their family and loved ones back home. That you know, having that communication is really important. And then you know, we have some research experiments too, where you're checking in on folks. You know, you're filling out. Christina can probably tell you about this. You know, there are questionnaires on the iPad, right? And you're taking a look at what they're doing on orbit and how that's impacting their mental fatigue. You know, these are really high achieving, high performing folks, but everybody needs a break sometimes. And so how do you adjust workload? And that helps us better plan missions and especially, you know, future exploration missions where you'll have, you know, maybe big surges and then some downtime as well.
Thanks for that. I appreciate that. I think lots of people wonder how we're going to go further in space as we do more exploration, and I know NASA's definitely got their fingers on the pulse of that. Liz Warren, you're not escaping here. We let you think for a minute or two while we get to the next question. Janaea in Harlem wants to know why there are 3 bioprinters. Why do we have 3 and not just 1?
Hey, Janaea, so that is a great question if I got your name correctly. So a lot of times we have multiple companies that are attempting to learn on the space station about the same thing. Why would that happen? So the Z-bland, the optical fiber that I mentioned, but also bioprinting. That's an indication that that's an area of research that has a lot of potential. And all of these different companies are innovating, learning, and may even want to pursue in-orbit production of either the Z-bland or the bioprinting example that was used. So that shows that that's a use of the space station, and it's stimulating the U.S. Economy. And so that's a good indication that those areas are high throughput and very high potential as well. And Christine, you know, you're not getting away either. You could probably have some comments on why there's so much interest in some of these areas and what that actually means in terms of what the future holds.
Certainly. I mean, I'm coming from a healthcare and life sciences background myself, and the idea that we have ways to do something differently because microgravity can make us something that we can't create on Earth is certainly exciting. And a shout out to some of the colleagues that we're working with in very difficult areas of organoids and 3D bioprinting. It's going to be an exciting future, and our astronauts certainly are making a lot of that possible. I have so many questions here. If you see me looking down, it's because I'm trying to keep up with the questions that are coming in and get them all here. So for all of you sending questions, and thank you so much. We'll try to get to all of them because we do have a little bit of time left. So hang in here with us. I see that somebody is here from the Philippines at 4 a.m. So Fritzy, thanks for hanging in here with us. I see many from Canada. I'll ask an easy one. Caroline in Boston wants to know, Christina, what did you miss the most while you were up in space for all of that time?
Well, that's an easy one, but it's a great question, and thank you. I definitely missed my family the most, my loved ones. I miss my dog, my husband, my brothers and sisters and parents so much. I think you don't really realize how much your support network means to you until you can only see them over the very, very occasional video chat or talk to them on the phone. And then those relationships just become so important. I never really found myself missing the kind of creature comforts like, oh, a latte or something like that. But another thing I missed would be just the smells and sights on our beautiful planet. I could see them from above. I could see the beaches. I could see the forests, but I couldn't smell them. I couldn't feel the wind. And so I would fantasize a lot about, gosh, what would that even feel like? Several months into my mission, I almost couldn't even remember what wind would feel like on your face. So just those sensory experiences are so special.
I can imagine what that must be like, because you are really in a very confined space, and it's that same air that's recirculated, so it's not like you get the waft from the beach of beach air or something up there. Here's a tough one. So let's see. Kaylee wants to know, and this might be a Jennifer question, how are astronauts protected from radiation? How do you keep from being radiated while you are up there in the microgravity area?
Yeah, that's a great question. So on the International Space Station, to start, we actually have a lot of shielding that's built into our vehicle itself. We use that to protect our astronauts by just spacecraft design and materials. We also have groups that monitor radiation activity. So if you see something that might be of concern, there are different areas of the space station that are more shielded than others. There are also things that you have on space stations, such as water, bags full of water and things like that can kind of help dissipate some of that radiation if it were to come in. But yeah, Christina, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that as well.
Great answer. I'm glad to hear that there was a good answer to that, how we're protected. No, that's definitely part of our training, how radiation can affect the human body and what we can expect in terms of irradiation that we'll receive during a typical mission. And one of the interesting things, I think, in terms of its implication for going deeper is how much the Earth's magnetosphere actually protects us. When we're in low Earth orbit, which is only about 250 miles above the surface of the Earth, we're beneath the radiation belts on Earth, and we're kind of protected by the magnetosphere from any radiation coming from our solar environment. So going and looking into deeper space, it's so important that we are still paying close attention to ways to mitigate radiation exposure, because we're not going to have that protective magnetosphere of the Earth when we go deeper into Mars. So we're going to have to really rely more on vehicle design, like she mentioned, monitoring big radiation events, and how we can do novel ways of shielding.
So we're going to continue on that effects on the body. That's radiation. Christina, when you gave your talk here and showed us pictures, you were talking about you yourself being part of the experiment, or you were what was being experimented on. And so Julie in Montreal wants to know something about the impacts on the body, and Anna specifically wants to know about bone loss, bone density. So between you and Jennifer, if you can tell us a little bit about first, how are you part of that research? And then what can be done with the results of those things?
Sure, I can just offer, the onboard view. And I'll just mention that if it's possible for our IT support to bring up a slide in my presentation, it's number 44, to show a demonstration of how we exercise on board. If not, I'm happy to just describe it. But that is true. Without gravity and your muscles and bones having to constantly respond to holding itself up and things like that, you would normally atrophy both your muscles and your bone. So we have countermeasures like this. This is me actually running on the space treadmill. And as you can see, you can't just run like normal. And yes, the treadmill is mounted on the wall, but we have to actually put a harness on that has bungees to attach it to the base of the treadmill. And exercise is very important in space. We do cardio exercise and weightlifting or resistance exercise every single day to counteract the effects of microgravity. And we're basically to the point where we've gotten so good at that we don't see huge muscle and bone loss as far as I know. So that's the experimental or the experiential side of it, having experienced that. And I'll turn it over to Jennifer.
Yep, that was a great explanation. I think Christina covered it really well. You know, we have been looking at this and doing it for quite some time. And so to protect our astronaut health, we have these countermeasures in place, is what we call them. So, you know, how do we counter the effects of microgravity on the human body and make sure that they maintain their, you know, bone density and muscle mass? Something that's really interesting to think about is a lot of the things that you see in space and how your body changes, we might think about it in a negative way, like you lose muscle or you lose bone. It's actually your body is very adaptive, right? So it's adapting to its new environment and adapting to things it doesn't need in microgravity or in space. So it really causes those problems when you readapt back to your different environment of being here on Earth. And so that's an interesting challenge when we look at changing environments, you know, from Earth to space to, you know, our next destination, right? Maybe lunar or Martian gravity, what those changes are going to look like, and how do we, you know, protect our astronauts and make sure we have the right things in place.
And can I chime in there too, Christine?
Sure, absolutely.
So, you know, a lot of those issues that were mentioned, the loss of bone, loss of muscle, cardiovascular deconditioning, immune dysfunction, or even some kidney issues, all of those issues that may happen in astronauts, we have countermeasures to prevent those changes from happening. But a lot of those changes, they look a lot like disease states here on Earth. So osteoporosis happens on Earth. Something very similar maybe is happening to astronauts. It may not be the exact same process, but what it does is it gives us some very unique insights. So Christina is young, one of the healthiest people on the planet, and we sent her to space, and her bones might start to decrease in their strength and their mass if we didn't have her do countermeasures or that exercise that she mentioned. But the interesting thing is there's a lot of interest here on Earth in studying diseases like osteoporosis. It takes a really long time to do those studies on Earth. But in someone like Christina, that change in her bone happened really, really quickly. And the interesting thing, of course, is that if she did lose any bone while she was in space, it was able to be reversed when she got back to Earth. And so that's a really interesting thing for people who want to study diseases. So we mentioned like protein crystal growth. That's one way to study diseases or disease processes and design new medications. But taking advantage of those rapid changes in human physiology can really give us interesting insights for studies, you know, maybe funded by the NIH, for example, to understand how we might come up with some new therapeutics for issues of aging here on Earth.
Well, we thank Christina for being our project up there and being part of that. That's so good of the astronauts to participate in that way. That's really actually very giving and very selfless of the astronauts to be part of. So we on Earth can appreciate that. I have another question. For, you know, there's some commercial crew coming up, and by that we mean not NASA astronauts, but non-NASA people who could potentially be going to do their own research on the station and in space. And Kenny from Norristown, Pennsylvania asked if a healthy adult can travel to the International Space Station and live and operate it without extensive training, or is it really a huge amount of training that those private astronauts are going to have to go through?
Yeah, so we are talking about having private astronaut missions. These astronauts would have to go through, you know, medical qualifications and make sure you're healthy. for the trip, as well as receive the appropriate training. And so that probably would really be scoped to the mission of what they're going to do on board ISS. But there's a minimum amount of training, no matter what, that you need to have if you're going to go to space station, and that's really to be able to be safe and respond if something goes wrong when you're up there, and be a helpful crewmate. And then the rest of the training would probably depend on what their objectives are.
I always imagine it being, don't touch that. So.
Yeah, that's something NASA is definitely taking a look into, and we'll work with folks who designed those missions.
Yeah, big piece of tape over, do not touch this switch. There you go. So next up, I'm gonna ask Justin, who's queuing up our questions, to queue up the next question from the Boys and Girls Club.
My name is Donna at the Boys and Girls Club at the Women's Home. How many days does it take you to go to the moon?
How many days does it take to go to the moon, Christina, if you were going to fly up there in one of those nice new rockets we have?
Yes, great question, because we are going back to the moon. We're going to be going back in a few short years. So the moon is about 1,000 times farther away than the space station. The space station is about 250 miles away, and the moon is about almost 250,000 miles away. So we get to the space station in just a matter of hours, but it would take about 3 days to get to the moon if we were to go in our standard spacecraft that we have now. So to put that in perspective, if you were in a car driving to the moon at that speed, it would take you 6 months about of continuous driving at highway speeds to get all the way to the moon. It's pretty far. But I think you're up for it.
Next question.
My name is Cedric at the Boys and Girls Club, the Women's Home. How many people have gone to the moon?
All right, Liz, we're going to let you field this one. How many people have gone to the moon?
Well, 12 people have walked on the moon. But as Christina just described, that's going to change pretty soon. NASA and some international partners are going back to the moon to stay in a sustainable way. So people are going to be living on the moon, maybe just like on the space station. And the next man and the first woman, they're going to be walking on the moon, as we just said, in pretty short order, just a few short years. So stay tuned and get involved. We need all the help we can get.
All righty. I have another tough question here about the 3D printing. And so Amy from the Redmond Proficiency Academy says, you talked about taking things up and using the microgravity to build those structures, but now you have to bring them back down to use them on Earth. So could they collapse when they come back down? How do we bring them back down and keep them useful? I don't know who wants to answer that one. I'll throw that out there.
So I'll start out, because I think that might be, I think Amy's question has to do with the 3D bioprinter. So some of those tissues that we're printing, you're absolutely right, Amy, they're a little bit fragile. And so one of the things that we do is on one of these missions where we're able to do some 3D printing is send some bio ink, some of that raw material, up on one of those commercial resupply vehicles, like a SpaceX Dragon, for example, and have the astronauts use the ink, put it in the printer, print up a tissue or a construct, and then it gets put into an incubator. And this is all hardware that has been designed and tested by one of our partners, Tech Shop. And once that tissue has incubated for a while and had a chance to mature, maybe for a month or maybe even a little bit longer, then we can bring that tissue construct, or one day maybe an entire human organ, and we can bring it back down to Earth, maybe in a fluid chamber, so kind of protect it a little bit from getting bumped too much. and in that way we're able to protect those tissues and bring them back, and they're not just going to kind of squash down. So it's the ability to let those tissues mature for a while in space that really gives us that advantage.
Thank you for that. I did not actually know that. So thank you for filling me in on that. That's good to know. I have another question from the Boys and Girls Club. We're going to give this one to Jennifer. So what's the last question that we have from the Boys and Girls Club?
My name is Marissa at the Boys and Girls Club at the Women's Home. Can you take your pet to the moon?
Can you take your pet to the moon, Jennifer?
I love this question. So right now, we are not taking any pets, or do we have plans to take pets in space? But you know, it's a great question. We've got a lot of animal lovers I know on this panel. I grew up with a dog, and so you know, we find that animals adapt in space, kind of similar to people. You know, we've flown a variety of model organisms, from spiders to geckos to fish, and what you see is animals sort of have the same period of orienting themselves, and then they readjust to what their space-flight behavior would be. So I would say, you know, start thinking about if you could take an animal into space, or if you could bring a pet one day, what you'd like to bring and the types of things that they would need. You know, they need, just like people, they need food and water and plenty of room. So yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about for sure.
Liz's cat and Christina's dog, and they'll all be happy up there. There have been zebrafish up there before, and of course the mice in space, including those mighty mice that have been up there. So there are some animals that are doing work up there in space. So good to know that they're up there. There are a whole bunch of questions that are similar, so I'm going to hope I get everybody's name that sent this in correctly. Shazanaya, Maria, Sabam, Alina, and a bunch of people want to know about becoming an astronaut. So you've got a lot of fans who want to follow in your footsteps, Christine. They want to know, and I'm sure all of you have some insights. Liz, you suggested stay in STEM, get some good science background. What should they study? How should they be an astronaut? How can they follow in your footsteps?
Thanks for everyone for that question. I cannot wait to see you guys in space and as NASA explorers. And, you know, just like I'm following in the footsteps of the people that I looked up to, I'm really excited to hopefully share some of my journey to becoming an astronaut, which definitely has been my dream my entire life. So definitely studying a technological field like science, math, or engineering. But more importantly than that, following your passions is so important. Doing what you love, I think that brings you to basically be as successful as you possibly can, and also to contribute the most to the world and to be as personally fulfilled along the way as possible. I often say, do what scares you. And the reason I say that is that oftentimes what scares us is something that has intrigued us. It's caught our attention, but we might think that it's just outside the realm of possibility for us. And striving to meet that goal is actually going to not only contribute optimally to the world, but it's going to have the most benefits for us too, because we learn from that confidence building, we learn what we can do, and we get fulfillment out of achieving goals that we originally thought we couldn't do. And finally, a last piece of advice that I have is to support the people around you. Sometimes we might get caught up in our own dreams, and we forget that celebrating collective achievements reminds us to be our best as part of a team, and to support each other to basically make sure that the focus is always on what can we contribute. And doing that optimally means that we are always supporting each other. So like I said, I can't wait to see how you all are going to contribute to human spaceflight or whatever your passions may lead you to.
Whoops, me talking on mute. The secret that some people know is that I always wanted to be an astronaut, and this is, I came close. I at least get to work with the International Space Station. So for all of you students out there who do want to become astronauts, I would say astronaut is a great job, but there are other jobs. Jennifer's job, Liz's job, my job. There's other jobs to do related to aerospace and related to astronauts. So there's plenty of things for people to do out there. So and we welcome you all to join us in this endeavor. there are lots more questions, and I'm a little bit short on time. So I am going to say that if you're interested in putting a project out there on the space station, and you want to know how to get your CubeSat launched, or your bio project, or your plants up into space, we're here to help you with that. And so I'm going to tell you to join us for the next thing here, which is going to be in about 15 minutes. So stay with us. In the meantime, I'm going to ask my panelists, starting with Christina, then Liz and Jennifer, if you've got any last thoughts for people who had so many good questions for us. So Christina, last thoughts.
You know, one thing I like to end on, if I have the chance, is to talk about the biggest takeaway from my mission, contributing to science that was just so unique and brought so many amazing benefits back to work, back to Earth, and being a part of the teams that have devoted their lives and their professional careers to doing that. It really brings up a sense of humility for me. It reminds me that being a part of a team and focusing on how you're contributing, and the fact that we all need each other and that we all have special skills to bring to the table to achieve our collective goals and dreams, is really the most important thing that I learned during my entire space flight. So thank you so much for your interest. I can't wait to see the experiments that you all come up with, and more importantly, I can't wait to see the benefits when they're back on Earth as we, you know, explore by all and for all.
Liz, thoughts?
I think my concluding comment will follow a little bit in line with what Christina just said. And, you know, sometimes personally, I get a little wrapped up in the technology and the engineering and how difficult some of these things that we do as a human species are, but it really comes down to people. And one of the things that I've learned just, you know, this year really is how important the support of friends and other scientists are, and how much we learn from each other, and conversing and just talking about science for me has really opened my eyes, and I've learned so much, as opposed to if I was just alone reading a book or reading a paper on my own without a chance to really think through or talk through ideas. So it kind of falls in line with Christina's comments, and that we're all doing this together, and we're one big team, and it's felt really good to kind of have that approach.
Thanks for that. That's true. And Christina, you even mentioned that when you were one of the pieces of video where you're saying we're doing this as a team, we're in this together. So that's a really great point. Jennifer, you get the last words.
Yeah, so I will echo that. I love that piece in the video as well. This is a great community, and I would say, you know, just, you know, NASA spaceflight in general, working with our international partners, but you know, the science community too has been incredibly welcoming. You know, I never imagined being an investigator that with a biology background, I would be working with, you know, some of the world's experts in space fluid physics. But it's incredible the community that space research has, and the access to thoughts and ideas, and how welcoming everyone is. So I just want to say thanks for you know, including me in the panel here today. And for those of you who didn't get a chance to ask a question, you know, reach out to us. You know, they shared earlier, there are a lot of different social media avenues and ways that you can ask questions. So you know, we'd love to hear from you.
So thank you all. I want to thank you for joining me today. It's always a great pleasure to be able to talk about the things that we all have the fortune to be doing as part of our jobs. It's truly a pleasure to talk to you today. I'd like to also thank a couple of people who've been behind the scenes that you've heard me maybe shout out to here. Justin and Greg, who are handling our IT in the webinar today. Sean, who helped to put this together with another Christina, who's been feeding me questions through here. Sean also left his email address in, if you, I don't know if Justin can bring up that last page of the presentation, that Sean will collect some questions and respond to you if you have questions about doing projects. What we have next is a 10-minute break and a terrific video of the Earth. So for those of you who ask questions about how beautiful it is to see the planet from in space, and there you go, that is Sean Pfeiffer's email address, so you can jot that down. And he is the answer man after this. And if you have questions about doing a project with us, or questions in general about where to find information, Sean is there to help you. We're going to have a 10-minute video of how beautiful the Earth looks, and then we're going to reconvene to have a little bit of a breakout session for answering questions about your specific research. So we'd like you to stay with us. Thank you again, ladies, for joining me today. It was awesome to spend this time with you. Thank you so much.